The moment you decide to walk away, everything changes. Up until now, you were always there, answering calls, responding to texts, making an effort. He knew he had you, and that security made him take you for granted. You were just an option to him, something he assumed would always be available when convenient. But the moment you stop showing up, stop caring, stop feeding his ego, the power shifts. That's when he starts feeling what you felt, the uncertainty, the loss, the realization that he was never entitled to your presence in the first place. At first, he won't believe it. He'll assume it's temporary, that you're just upset and will eventually come back. After all, he's used to you always being there. He's conditioned to think that no matter how he treated you, you would still be available. But as the days pass and you remain distant, as the messages go unanswered, as the silence grows louder, it starts to sink in. Something is different this time. You're not reacting the way you used to. You're not seeking his validation or trying to fix things. And that's when the discomfort begins. For the first time, he has to sit with the reality of what he's done. He has to face the truth that he pushed you to this point. He expected you to stay, to tolerate the uncertainty, to keep accepting breadcrumbs while he explored his other options. But now, he's left with the realization that he was never in control. He only had power because you gave it to him. And now that you've taken it back, he doesn't know what to do. At first, he'll try to act like it doesn't bother him. He might post on social media trying to make it seem like he's unbothered, like he's still in control. He might even try to test you, sending casual messages just to see if you'll respond. But when you don't take the bait, when you refuse to break your silence, that's when the panic sets in. He starts wondering if he miscalculated. He starts feeling the absence, the void that he never expected to experience. And that's the moment he finally understands what it feels like to be an option, to be uncertain, to feel like someone you once had access to is slipping away. He might even start regretting his decisions, wishing he had done things differently, but by then, it won't matter because the power is now in your hands. And that's exactly where it should have been all along. The realization hits him like a slow-burning fire when he thought he could control, but now it's spreading beyond his grasp. He thought he had the upper hand, believing that no matter how much he took you for granted, you would always be there, waiting, hoping, holding on to the idea that one day he would value you the way you valued him. But now, as the silence between you grows, as he watches you slip further and further away, he starts feeling what you once felt. The power dynamic has shifted, and he's left to face the consequences of his choices. At first, he tries to act as if nothing has changed. He distracts himself, going out, filling his time with anything that prevents him from acknowledging the void. Maybe he talks to other people, hoping to prove to himself that losing you isn't a big deal. But the truth lingers in the back of his mind, persistent and unshakable. None of it feels the same. The attention, the validation, the temporary distractions, they don't hold the same weight because deep down he knows those people don't see him the way you did. They don't know him the way you did. As time passes, the cracks begin to show. The initial pride that kept him from reaching out begins to fade, replaced by doubt and frustration. He starts questioning everything. Why haven't you checked in? Why aren't you chasing him like before? Why aren't you doing what he expected you to do? He thought you would be the one to break first, to come back seeking closure, to try and fix what was broken. But instead, you remain silent, focused on yourself, moving forward without him. And that's when the fear sets in. He replays moments in his mind, trying to pinpoint where he went wrong. He wonders if you met someone else, if you finally realized you deserve better, if you're truly done this time. He tells himself he doesn't care, that he can move on just as easily, but his actions betray him. He checks your social media, looks for any sign that you might still be thinking about him. Every time he sees you thriving, posting pictures, smiling, living your life without him, it chips away at his ego. Because he expected you to suffer in silence. He expected you to crumble. Instead, he's the one feeling the loss. And then comes the moment of realization. The understanding that you were never the one who needed him. He was the one who needed you, your presence, your energy, your effort. It was all something he took for granted, assuming it would always be there. But now that it's gone, he finally understands its value. And no matter how much he tries to suppress it, the truth is undeniable. He underestimated you, but by the time he realizes this, it's no longer your concern. You've already done what he never expected. You've taken your power back. Right? He assumed you would always be there, waiting in the shadows, hoping for his attention, longing for the moment he would finally see your worth. He thought he could come and go as he pleased, knowing that no matter how long he disappeared or how little effort he put in, you would still be there when he decided to return. But now something is different. He can feel it. The dynamic has shifted, and suddenly he is the one questioning, wondering, doubting himself. At first, he brushes it off, convincing himself that this is just another phase, that you're playing games, trying to get a reaction out of him. He assumes you'll give in sooner or later. That's what you always did, right? You forgave, you overlooked, you made excuses, but as time passes and you remain distant, he starts feeling something he never expected: uncertainty. The silence begins to weigh on him in ways he never imagined. He checks his phone more often than he'd like to admit, scrolling through old messages, rereading conversations where you once poured your heart out to him. He remembers how you used to reach out first, how you used to keep the connection alive, how you never let too much time pass without checking in. But now that effort is gone, and it's making him uneasy. He starts to wonder if he miscalculated, if he pushed too far this time. The confidence he once had begins to waver, and for the first time he questions whether he was wrong to assume you would always be there. He expected you to fight for his attention, to prove your worth, to chase him in the way you once did. But instead, you've gone silent, and the absence of your energy is deafening. He tells himself he doesn't care. He distracts himself with friends, with work, with meaningless interactions that serve as temporary escapes, but none of it fills the space you once occupied. No conversation feels as natural. No connection feels as genuine. The comfort of knowing you were always an option suddenly feels like a luxury he no longer has. Then the frustration sets in. He starts to question what changed. Did you meet someone else? Did you finally realize your worth? Have you truly moved on? These thoughts eat away at him, making him restless, irritable. He wants answers, but pride holds him back from reaching out. He doesn't want to admit that he's the one feeling the loss now. But eventually, the realization becomes impossible to ignore. He thought he had control, but he never did. He thought he could walk away and come back whenever he pleased, but now he's starting to understand that he overplayed his hand. He assumed your feelings for him gave him power, but in reality, your absence is what truly shows him who holds the power now. And as the days turn into weeks, as he watches you thrive, as he sees you no longer needing him in the way he once believed you did, it begins to sink in he lost something valuable. And this time, it's not coming back. At first, he convinced himself that nothing had changed. He told himself you were just being distant for the sake of it, that this was just another one of your phases, and soon enough you'd return to him like you always did. He reassured himself that he still had control, that he was still the one dictating how this dynamic played out. But as time passed and your absence remained constant, an unsettling realization started creeping in. This time, things were different. He tried to fight against the feeling. He distracted himself, kept himself busy, surrounded himself with other people, but no matter what he did, the thought of you lingered in the back of his mind. The certainty he once had about you always being available was beginning to crack. And the cracks only deepened as the days turned into weeks. Then the irritation set in. He started questioning everything. Why weren't you reaching out? Why weren't you trying to fix things? He had assumed that you would eventually break, that your emotions would override your pride and you'd come running back just like before. But that moment never came. Instead, he was the one feeling the shift, the one wondering why it didn't feel the same, why his usual games weren't working anymore. His ego refused to let him admit it at first, but the reality was undeniable. You had stopped playing the game. The chase, the dynamic, the cycle he had grown so used to, it was over, and that was when the fear truly set in. At first, he resisted the idea of reaching out. It went against everything he had conditioned himself to believe. He was the one who was supposed to be pursued. He was the one who set the tone. But as the silence between you stretched on, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: powerless. He started small, checking your social media, looking for signs that you might still be thinking about him. But what he saw didn't reassure him. You weren't posting cryptic messages or sad lyrics. You weren't subtly hinting at missing him. You weren't showing any signs of regret or longing. In fact, you seemed unbothered. And that realization hit him harder than he expected. He tried to convince himself that it was all an act, that you were pretending, that deep down you still cared just as much as before. But as time went on and you continued to thrive in your own space, he started to doubt himself in ways he never had before. So he did what he never thought he would. He reached out. Maybe it was a simple message, something casual, something meant to test the waters. Maybe he reacted to something you posted, hoping it would spark a conversation. But no matter what approach he took, one thing was clear. He needed validation. He needed to know that he still had an effect on you, that he wasn't just a memory you had left behind. But this time, you didn't respond the way he expected. Maybe you ignored him completely, or maybe you replied with the kind of indifference that shattered his illusion of control. Either way, he felt it, the shift in power. The moment he realized that he was no longer the one dictating the terms of this connection, and that was when it truly hit him. All this time, he thought he was the one who had options, the one who held the cards. But now, he was the one being forced to confront what it felt like to be an afterthought. He had spent so long believing you would always be there that he never considered what it would feel like if one day you weren't. And now, that day had come. At first, he might try to act like it doesn't matter. He'll put on a front, pretend he's unaffected, but deep down, he knows the truth. He's feeling what he once made you feel: uncertainty, doubt, regret, and the worst part, he knows it's his own doing. There's a moment when reality finally sets in, when he fully understands that he took you for granted, that he underestimated your strength. That moment is his reckoning, the point where he realizes he lost something real. And no matter what he does now, no matter how much he tries to undo the past, he knows one thing for certain: he can't force you back into his world. Because this time, you've truly moved on. At first, he tries to convince himself that nothing is wrong. He tells himself that he's fine, that this is just another temporary situation, that eventually you'll return like before. He refuses to accept the reality that you've changed, that you're no longer prioritizing him the way you once did. But deep down, there's a nagging feeling he can't shake. Something feels different this time. He scrolls through his messages, expecting to see a text from you, something that indicates you still care. But there's nothing. Days pass and his frustration begins to grow. The silence is unsettling. He thought he had you figured out, thought he knew exactly how you would react. But instead of chasing him, instead of trying to prove your worth, you've done the one thing he never expected. You walked away without looking back. At first, he acts like he doesn't care. He convinces himself that it's better this way. He tells his friends that you were too much, that you were the one always overreacting, always demanding too much from him. He pretends that this is just another chapter closing, nothing significant. But even as he says those words out loud, they don't feel as true as they once did. Then comes the overcompensation. He starts posting more, making it seem like he's living his best life, like nothing has affected him. He makes sure to look his best, to surround himself with people who boost his ego. He laughs louder, acts more confident, and pretends to be completely unbothered. But there's one problem. None of it is real. No matter how much he tries to distract himself, the silence between you grows heavier. He expected a reaction from you. He expected you to question why he was pulling away, to demand an explanation, to fight for him, but you didn't. And that's when it starts to hit him. Maybe he miscalculated. Maybe for the first time, he's the one who lost something. Now his thoughts start to shift. He replays old conversations, wondering where things changed. He starts remembering the small moments, the ones he once overlooked. The way you always checked in on him, the way you supported him when no one else did, the way you made him feel like he was important. And the more he reflects, the more he realizes how much of that was one-sided. He starts noticing things he didn't before, the way you used to wait for his replies, the way you used to get excited over the smallest effort on his part, the way you used to be so patient with him even when he didn't deserve it. And now all of that is gone. The power he once had over you has faded, and for the first time, he's the one left wondering. He debates reaching out. Maybe he types out a message but doesn't send it. Maybe he checks your social media, looking for a sign that you might still be thinking about him. But no matter what he does, he realizes one thing. He's now in the position he once put you in. He's the one waiting, the one wondering, the one who suddenly feels like he's just another option instead of a priority. And that realization stings. Because the truth is, he never truly considered what it would feel like to be on the receiving end of indifference. He never thought about what it meant to be the one hoping for a response, the one questioning if someone still cares. But now he understands. Now he knows exactly how it feels. As time passes, he has no choice but to accept it. He can try to pretend it doesn't bother him. He can act like he's fine, like nothing has changed, but deep down he knows that something has. He knows that he took you for granted. He knows that he assumed you would always be there, and now he's forced to live with the fact that you're not. The worst part, he knows he has no one to blame but himself. At first, he tries to convince himself that this is just a phase. He tells himself that you'll come back, that this silence is temporary, that eventually you'll miss him enough to break. He's always believed that he held the power, that you were the one who needed him more than he needed you. And for a while, he holds on to that belief, convinced that time is on his side. But then the days turn into weeks, the messages don't come, the calls never happen. And that's when the first real wave of doubt creeps in. He starts to wonder, was he wrong? Did he miscalculate? It's a thought he tries to push away, but it lingers, planting itself deep in his mind, forcing him to confront a reality he never expected. He starts noticing things he never paid attention to before. The way his phone feels a little too quiet, the way certain places remind him of you, the way a song or a passing conversation brings back memories he thought he had buried. He never thought he'd be the one affected. He always assumed he was untouchable, that he could walk away from anything without looking back. But now he's realizing just how much space you occupied in his life. At first, he fights against the feeling. He distracts himself, work, friends, meaningless interactions with people who don't truly matter. He fills his time with anything that can keep his mind off you, but distractions only last so long, because no matter how much he tries to avoid it, the reality is still there. You're gone. And for the first time, he's the one left wondering what went wrong. Then the overthinking starts. He replays old conversations, picking apart the details he once overlooked. He starts questioning his actions, wondering if he pushed you too far, if he was too dismissive, too distant, too confident that you'd never leave. He remembers the times you tried to talk to him, the moments you hinted at your feelings, the times you gave him chances to step up and he ignored them. Back then, he saw it as control, as power, but now looking back, he sees it for what it really was, opportunity. And he wasted it. Opportunity only. He starts watching you from a distance. Maybe he checks your social media. Maybe he asks mutual friends about you. He's not looking for anything in particular, just a sign that you miss him too, that this isn't over. But instead of finding what he's hoping for, he sees something else. You're moving on. You're smiling, laughing, living your life without hesitation. And that's when the panic sets in. Because for the first time, he realizes he's not the center of your world anymore. He's not the one you're waiting for, the one you're holding on to. He expected you to struggle without him, to be lost in his absence, but instead, you're thriving. And that shakes him more than anything else ever could. The desperation starts creeping in. He debates reaching out. Maybe he types out messages only to delete them. Maybe he looks for excuses to see you, to run into you accidentally. He wants to test the waters, to see if there's still an opening, a chance to pull you back in. But something stops him, because deep down he knows the truth. He knows that if he reaches out now, it won't be the same. He won't be met with the same warmth, the same eagerness, the same unquestioning loyalty you once gave him. He knows that even if you do respond, it won't be because you need him. It'll be because you're already past him. And that's a reality he's not ready to face. So he hesitates. He lingers in silence, trapped in the space between wanting to pull you back and knowing that he lost that right. And as time continues to pass, that space only grows wider. Because while he's busy looking back, you're already looking forward. While he's stuck in the past, you're building a future without him in it. And that's when it finally sinks in. The moment he dreaded, the truth he tried to avoid. He thought he could treat you like an option forever, that you would always be there waiting, hoping, trying. But now He knows differently. Now he understands that he wasn't the one in control, because in the end, it wasn't him who decided when this ended. It was you.